In the wind-scoured soup valley of coastal Peru, where the Pacific fogs drift inland each morning across the terraces of Caral, and the ancient platforms rise in precise alignment with celestial markers that still govern the desert sky, there is a place the official narratives never feature. It is not the celebrated circular plaza of the main temple, nor the towering stepped pyramid that dominates every authorized photograph and guided tour. It is a low rectangular annex on the northern margin of the Great Platform, a structure whose entrance was deliberately sealed with rubble and earth during the final phases of the site's occupation. The location was only relocated during emergency stabilization work in 1997. Since that time, access has been progressively restricted. The local water table has risen steadily, and the chamber that houses the critical evidence now lies partially below the level where moisture migrates through the stone fabric. Within that chamber, resting on its original foundation blocks, sits a single slab of fine-grained granite transported from the distant Andean foothills more than 80 kilometers away. Its exposed western face carries 12 parallel incisions so regular, so geometrically consistent, that they stand outside every conventional explanation offered for prehistoric stone working in the Americas. These are not the irregular pits and crushing spalls left by repeated pounding with harder stone mauls. These are clean, parallel channels, each measuring between 2.1 and 2.4 millimeters in width at the surface, and maintaining a depth of 3.7 millimeters with a tolerance of less than 0.2 millimeters across their full 2.4-meter length. The intervening surfaces retain a polish that penetrates the individual crystal boundaries of quartz and feldspar. The groove floors show a distinct rounding and a thin subsurface zone of recrystallized silica, extending no more than 0.25 millimeters into the matrix, indicating brief, localized thermal alteration without bulk heating of the stone mass. At each termination, a symmetrical fan of fine fractures radiates outward, as though the energy driving the process was deliberately dissipated to protect the structural integrity of the block. These are the marks that no one can explain within the accepted framework. These are the marks that have remained hidden beneath layers of official silence and denied access. It was Dr. Elena Paredes who first committed a detailed description to paper. In 1968, during a preliminary geological reconnaissance of the Supa Valley conducted under the auspices of the National University of San Marcos, she spent 3 days mapping the exposed stones of the northern annex. Her handwritten field notes, still bearing the original graphite corrections and marginal calculations, record the groove dimensions with surveyor precision. She observed the absence of the impact spalling and crushing expected from stone-on-stone abrasion and noted that the polish extended into protected recesses that no manual rubbing action could have reached. Paredes filed her observations as an appendix to a routine lithological report. The appendix was accepted without comment and then ignored. Her field notes were placed in a storage room at the university, where they remained undisturbed until a graduate student researching valley hydrology requested the box in 2015 for an unrelated project. The rediscovery was quiet. No announcement followed. The notes were photographed on a personal device, and copies began to circulate within a narrow network of researchers who recognized their implications. Those photographs, together with a series of macro images captured during a limited inspection in early 2022 using a portable digital microscope at 150 times and 400 times magnification, are now held in a private collection in Liechtenstein under catalog reference LPC-AND-2022-03. The collector has permitted viewing only under strict conditions of confidentiality. No official Peruvian institution has acknowledged the existence or the content of these records. For more than a century, the consensus within Andean archaeology has remained fixed. The platforms and retaining walls of Caral and its sister cities in the Norte Chico region are said to have been raised using only local river cobbles, wooden levers, fiber ropes, and the sustained labor of thousands. Experimental replications have shown that rough blocks can be shaped and moved by such means. What the experiments have never addressed, and what the official narrative continues to sidestep, is the specific microscopic signature preserved on this particular granite slab. The marks do not match the irregular high-impact damage produced by pounding. They do not match the broader, shallower grooves produced by copper or stone saws with abrasive slurries in the manner documented elsewhere. They match nothing that has been replicated using only the tools attributed to the Caral builders. Requests for detailed non-destructive examination have been met with requirements for institutional sponsorship, on-site supervision, and restrictions on data publication that effectively prevent independent verification. The data required to resolve the question remains out of reach. When the marks are examined instead as the surviving trace of a deliberate engineering sequence, a coherent operational procedure emerges with measurable parameters. The process began with selection of a granite block whose mineral composition and internal acoustic response had been tested for suitability. A cutting assembly, most likely a rigid frame carrying multiple vibrating elements or a single large transducer coupled through a liquid medium, was positioned against the prepared surface. The assembly was driven at a frequency tuned to a resonant mode of the granite near 19,400 cycles per minute. At this frequency, a standing wave pattern formed within the stone, with nodes spaced at intervals that precisely match the observed groove spacing. A slurry of water and fine corundum abrasive was introduced at the contact zone. Vibrational energy induced microcavitation at crystal boundaries, weakening intergranular bonds ahead of the abrasive particles. Each controlled pass removed a uniform layer approximately 0.4 millimeters thick, while the standing wave prevented uncontrolled deep fracturing. After 12 passes, the target depth was reached. The tool was withdrawn through a programmed deceleration that allowed residual vibrational energy to dissipate through the symmetrical terminal fracture fans. The entire sequence left behind a surface whose microscopic characteristics are diagnostic of vibrational machining rather than percussion or simple abrasion. The level of control required implies not only the existence of the vibrating mechanism, but also a working knowledge of the acoustic properties of the specific stone, precise calibration of frequency to material resonance, and management of energy dissipation to protect the block. None of this appears in the conventional reconstruction of Norte Chico technology. Yet the physical record of the sequence remains embedded in the granite. Independent lines of evidence from previously unconnected sources reinforce the same operational parameters. In the private papers of the German ethnographer Wilhelm Meyer, acquired by a Swiss institutional archive in 2009. A transcription survives of an oral account collected in 1897 near Juarez. An elder described instruments used by the old ones that produced a sustained humming capable of making hard rock yield. Meyer recorded the description, but classified it as mythological and never published the full text. The frequency range implied by the account aligns with the vibrational parameters required to produce the Caral groove signatures. A second corroboration appears in an unpublished technical appendix to a 2018 Bolivian archaeological assessment of tool marks at Pumapunku. The main report attributed all features to conventional methods. The appendix contains three-dimensional surface profilometry data showing groove cross-sections and subsurface alteration zones whose statistical parameters fall within 4% of those measured on the Caral granite. The appendix was excluded from the circulated version of the report and became available only after a formal information request filed in 2020. A third thread lies in a group of quipu fragments held in restricted storage at the Museo Nacional de Arqueología in Lima. Catalogued in 1974 but never displayed or fully decoded, these chords carry knot sequences whose numerical values, when interpreted as frequency multiples, depth increments, and pass counts, align with the measured characteristics of the Caral incisions to within 3%. An internal ministry assessment dated 2013 noted the correspondence. Modern experimental replication has now demonstrated that the physical signatures observed on the Caral granite can be produced using vibrational machining techniques. In 2017, a team led by material scientist Dr. Lars Holmgren at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm published controlled trials on granite samples selected for close mineralogical match to the Andean material. Using a 20 kHz transducer with corundum slurry, they generated grooves whose width, depth uniformity, edge polish, and subsurface recrystallization zones matched the ancient marks in every significant parameter. Subsequent portable equipment trials at the University of California, Davis, in 2021, confirmed that the required energy levels fall within the range that could be supplied by human-powered acoustic resonators or early mechanical amplifiers. The experimental marks are indistinguishable from the Caral grooves under identical microscopic examination. The technology is therefore physically achievable. It is simply absent from the toolkit assigned to the builders of Norte Chico by mainstream archaeology. The pattern of restriction that surrounds this evidence follows a sequence recognizable wherever comparable technical capabilities appear in the ancient record. In the earliest layer, during the period of Caral's decline and the regional reorganization around 1800 BCE, structures containing the most precise stonework were decommissioned and buried beneath later construction. Public architecture continued in simpler forms, while specialized technical features were removed from view and from transmission. The effect parallels the erasures of technical and cosmological information carried out under Akhenaten and Horemheb in the Nile Valley. The religious layer arrived with the Spanish conquest. Extirpators of idolatry systematically targeted material culture, preserving pre-Christian technical knowledge. Quipus were burned by the thousands. Stone monuments were toppled or incorporated into Christian foundations. Chronicles that might have preserved technical descriptions were edited or suppressed by clerical authorities in Lima and Seville. The possibility that certain stones could be shaped by means other than brute force was reframed as pagan magic and driven underground. In the 19th century, the scientific expeditions that produced the first systematic descriptions of Andean ruins operated under their own constraints. Artists attached to major commissions received explicit instructions, preserved in surviving correspondence, to emphasize the rudimentary character of American achievements, and to smooth or omit details suggesting higher precision. Original field sketches showing problematic regularity were redrawn for publication or left unexamined in archives. The published record that reached Europe and North America was already filtered. The contemporary layer is the most efficient. Requests for access to the granite block for detailed acoustic, petrographic, and microscopic analysis have been consistently denied or subjected to conditions that preclude independent work. The official rationale cites conservation concerns tied to the rising groundwater now threatening the chamber. Internal communications within the responsible Peruvian agencies have identified the feature as sensitive and advised against permitting unsupervised examination by independent teams. The permit remains denied, and in a pattern that reveals the broader architecture of control, the same mechanisms operate elsewhere. In the Nile Valley, the granite panel remains sealed beneath the rising groundwater. Access remains forbidden. The permit is still denied. Here is where the implications become impossible to contain within conventional frameworks. The vibrational regime that produced the grooves is not merely an efficient cutting method. The same frequency range and standing wave mechanics that permitted controlled material removal are also the conditions under which the mechanical properties of the stone itself could be temporarily modified. At higher energy input or different coupling, the standing wave field could induce localized changes in effective rigidity or density, rendering the granite more responsive to positioning or even to forms of levitation and precise alignment during construction. The marks therefore record not only the cutting process, but the boundary conditions of a larger operational system in which stone was treated as a responsive medium rather than an inert mass. This is the knowledge that every subsequent layer of restriction was designed to keep from coherent reconstruction. Once the full sequence is understood, the question expands beyond Caral. It reaches the larger problem of how multiple ancient civilizations on opposite sides of the globe achieved comparable results with comparable physical signatures, and why the record of that shared capability was systematically dismantled across successive historical periods. Those who have followed this account to its conclusion already understand that the evidence presented is not a collection of isolated anomalies, but a connected body of physical data, archival fragments, experimental replication, and suppressed internal documentation. The institutions that control access to the primary material know that synthesis of these threads undermines the foundational assumption of technological isolation and uniformly primitive development in the pre-Columbian Americas. Each new fragment that reaches public attention, each denied permit, each leaked internal communication makes the larger pattern more difficult to obscure. If you are still watching, you are participating in the recovery of that pattern. Share this information with those who continue to accept the official account as complete. The wider the circulation, the greater the pressure for the restrictions to be lifted or for independent channels of verification to be created. Subscribe now so that you receive the next pieces of the reconstruction as they surface. The window, during which these fragments can still be assembled, is closing, and those who have maintained the restrictions for generations are not passive observers. What if the marks on the granite of Caral are not the final traces of a lost technique, but the opening page of a technical manual that has waited millennia to be read again? What other stones in the Andes, or in regions linked by the same resonant signatures, carry the same instructions in their surfaces? And what will be the response when the next formal request for access to the sealed chamber is submitted, or when it is refused once more on the familiar grounds of conservation and security? In the investigation that follows, we will trace the acoustic principles from the individual stone marks into the larger architectural layout of the Caral plazas themselves, examining the evidence that the very placement and proportions of the structures were calibrated to function as acoustic instruments on a monumental scale. The implications extend beyond any single site. They reach into the question of what knowledge was once held in common across the ancient world and why it was systematically removed from the record. If these questions have stirred something in you, if the possibility that the past contains technologies we have only begun to approach from our own direction feels like a door that should be opened rather than kept locked, then subscribe, comment with your observations, and become part of the community that refuses to let the fragments remain scattered. The evidence exists. It has only been waiting for the right frequency to bring it back into resonance.